Hello, folks, and welcome to an experiment. This is a new kind of podcast. I haven't done one of these before. I have my friend James Thomson here, and he's a very well-known independent developer and a world-class work-from-home champion. And right now, of course, you're all very aware that with the coronavirus, we're stuck at home. It can feel rather isolating or anxious by ourselves, reading news all day about quarantine and similar. And I'm keen to break that somehow. So I figured we'd come here on YouTube, have a chat about Apple platform development, working from home, tips for both, being featured in the App Store, and lots more. And hopefully in doing so, helping you all feel a little bit more normal, a little bit more relaxed, like you're just sort of a random working from home day for an hour or so about the way. Now, I should say before we start, I always have some rules in these live streams. Please, no harassment or trolling. You'll get blocked and banned and kicked out, which is not a nice thing. Please don't do that. No feigned surprise. If someone asks a question and they weren't aware of some technology, and no well actuallys. So just be a nice, normal person, and you'll fit right in. As with all my streams and videos, I want to say briefly thank you so much to Instabug for sponsoring the site. If you integrate their SDK with your app, you can make it super easy to know why your app crashed and then fix it much faster. I've got tons of questions for James. I'm going to go through them, but hopefully you folks have questions too. So by all means, jump into that chat window, ask away, and I will feature the most exciting ones or interesting ones and grill James to make sure he really answers them fully. So James, you're living the dream, right? You are making enough money from app development on Apple's platforms that it's your job. I mean, was that always the plan for you, or was it a side gig that just grew and grew and grew and grew?
I mean, I think none of this was planned. I think I kind of just have been sort of staggering from one success to the next through a combination of luck and stubbornness. And yeah, I realized that it's 20 years since I started doing this, like working independently, almost to the month.
Happy anniversary!
Well, thank you. And yeah, so I kind of I'm in a great position in the First Drag thing, and then PCalc have been supporting me, and Dice by PCalc, of course. Have been supporting me and my wife, and we work from home. So, especially in the current situation, we have a pretty good setup in terms of, I literally, the start of this month, I bought myself a new desk and I set myself up a nice working environment, improved a bunch of things. And then all this kicked off. So I'm kind of I timed that pretty well. And yeah, it's, we've had some discussions about this on Twitter. Sales are not great. I mean, they've gone down. We've had a bit of a resurgence in the last few days and stuff, but I can see, for the stuff I sell, some of it might not be as relevant right now. But, we've done well enough that I'm in a good position to sort of kind of get through the next few months.
So is it fairly steady otherwise? I mean, apart from, the current global pandemic, is it fairly steady sales, or you see them moving in one direction?
You see, or what I see is sort of plateaus. Sometimes we'll go up and the level will plateau at another level, and sometimes it will come down, and it is seasonal. There's a lot more stuff around about the OS and device releases in the autumn, and so we usually see a spike there, especially if we've done something to get featured, or some technology adoption of new devices or something like that.
So when Apple shipped the shiny new iPhone, folks go, "Oh, a brilliant calculator," or something like that, or an astonishing dice app on my iPad.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's stuff like, I'm trying to think of an example, but say Apple has some super new shiny technology that they're wanting to push. If you adopt said technology in your app, and Apple will go, well, look, this person has done the work. They've supported Siri shortcuts well, stuff like that. Then you're more likely to get on a short list of here are apps that are supporting this and get featured on the store. And if you do that, the other thing is the press like to talk about, well, here's new shiny things and here are some apps that do it. So that's been our kind of strategy I used strategy in quotes, but it's part of the kind of one thing that I'm known for, at least, is a new technology comes out. How can I crowbar it inside a calculator?
So there you have, folks. If you're listening to this right now and you want to know what is a killer tip for being featured, because let's face it, PCalc's been featured a heck of a lot over the years.
Yeah.
Right there. You see Apple ARKit, whatever it is, Core ML comes out. Can you find a way to get that into your app in a meaningful, productive way and let them know about it?
Yeah.
Rip off James.
It's not ripping off. And I think a lot of this stuff, it's kind of, rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing. A healthy app ecosystem of stuff. It was like literally 5 minutes before we started recording, I sent a bit of code to another developer who was like, oh, how do you do this? And I was like, well, here's the code I have, here you go. And I'm quite happy generally to do that kind of thing and try and sort of help people. I'm not going to give them all my code, but it's like ever since I started doing this, which was quite a while ago, like when back in the sort of heady days when there were lots of app launchers, when DragThing was in its heyday, I knew all the other people who were writing launchers, and we would swap, codes and snippets and stuff. And it's like, how do you do this? How do you get the icon for this? And it's like, right. Oh, here you go. And there was never really that sort of. It wasn't like a competition. It was kind of like, yeah, we were all kind of competing with each other, but we were sort of trying to be part of a community as well. Don't get me wrong. If somebody started ripping me off, I would be quite unhappy. But it's trying to be nice.
Yeah. So we've got a question here from folks watching this saying, is that a Star Wars collection in the background? And in the live stream, they can only see part of your collection. And trust me, folks, I saw the full thing behind him. This man is a collector, a fine connoisseur.
So on the wall behind me, which you can see some of, there are currently 3 picture frames filled with minifigures. The one that you can see that's behind my shoulder is the Star Wars minifigures. In the far left is the DC superheroes minifigures, and in the middle it's Marvel minifigures. So each one holds, I think it's about 120 figures. I have also just ordered 3 more of those frames.
This is one of the perks of working from home, presumably. Show them the little cuddly toy you have just out of shot to your left, because it's so topical in this current atmosphere.
Okay, we have the this is Fine Dog that sits behind me and reminds me of how fine it is.
Yes. So speaking of being adopted by Apple and promoted in the App Store with adding things like AR or widgets or Siri shortcuts, whatever it is you've been working on, does that really make an impact, do you think?
Yeah, it has a number of impacts, or it has an impact in a number of different directions. One, if you get featured on the store, there is a sort of financial bump that you'll get to that in terms of sales. And the bumps are not as big as they used to be. It used to be the case if, say, there was like, I don't know, iOS 8 or whatever, and there'd be a section on the store that was like great apps for iOS 8, and it was 20 apps or something. If you got featured on that, that would sit around for, weeks, and it was really high visibility on the store. Nowadays, there are features like that, and for us anyway, it's not as big, but it's still significant, and it's still something that's very nice. And also, you get there's other things like there's the app of the day, which we got once a few years ago, which was very nice. But when they do that, there's a story associated, or there can be a story associated with your app. And then if anyone searches for your app, they'll see not only the actual app, but they'll see the story listed as well. So they can click on that and they can get more information. And it's kind of like having a little editorial section on your app.
Yeah, I guess it's as close as we can get to an Apple recommendation, presumably.
Yeah, I mean there are other things. There is an editor's recommendation or something like that, which we've never got. Not that he's bitter, but I mean there are things like that which kind of add to the store. But it also, when you get something like that, it kind of it boosts your visibility slightly more in the surrounding community. So, if say there was also like somebody writing a story about apps that use Siri shortcuts, one of the things they might do for research is look at this, if Apple's done a recommended list of apps,
right?
And so they might pick up on that. So there is absolutely no downside to getting featured, there's also no guarantee of getting featured, even if you do all this stuff, because there's still, millions of apps on the store. So it is kind of as an answer to the question, how do you get featured? I don't know, because I've never submitted my apps.
So you're not proactively talking to Apple, you're all reactively waiting for them to...
Sometimes, occasionally I have talked to people at Apple. Sometimes somebody will reach out, and you do get, there's a thing called a promotional artwork request, which is Apple is considering featuring you.
Yeah, I know.
And it's interesting because you get this thing and it's like, please can you give us, 3,000 professional art assets and logos and all this sort of stuff, and get it to us in 5 days. At which point you go, I don't have any of those things, so I'm just going to spend the next 5 days trying to come up with artwork and screenshots and all these things.
Yeah, so if folks haven't had one of those before, you get this request from Apple saying we want to feature you on the App Store, App of the Day or something, and they want to provide, here's what the artwork should do, this big for iPad, this big for iPad portrait, this big for iPhone, in the same picture. It takes a bit of thinking to come up with some creative, useful, bright, colourful, attractive branding that would work for that.
And it's things like, here are the areas of the image that might have text on it, and here's where you should focus your imagery. And if you don't have like logos and things like that, it is quite a sort of a stretch to actually come up with things. And I mean, for a calculator as well, it's quite difficult, other than having somebody standing at a blackboard covered in mathematical symbols. It's kind of hard to communicate much.
So as an indie developer, how much time do you think, adding new features versus adding bugs? Have you got a sort of structured, almost like Jira-like board you'd get in a professional company, or are you just super chilled out?
I have systems. They're not necessarily as sophisticated as you might think they are. So one of the things that I do is, for each of my apps, and this is going to sound terrible, and I apologize to anyone who does project management, task management, bug tracking.
Don't worry, it's between you, me, and everyone else on YouTube ever, okay? That's it.
Yeah, he glances at the number of people watching now and watches his career go on fire. So I have basically a text document of notes for each app. And if I think of something, I write it down. If somebody emails me with something and says, here's a problem, I'll write it down in there. And the document's got various sections. So there's like a sort of, known bugs, kind of to-do, long-term to-do sort of ideas and things like that. And so I'll kind of, when I'm working on a new version, what I'll do is I'll sort of look at the things, the ideas that I've had and I've written down. I'll look at the things people have said or bugs, and I'll try and come up with a sort of, here's a rough list of the things I would like to do for this release. And that obviously changes over time and as things come in. And if it's going to be just a bug fix release, then it's more of a case of like scan the stuff that's come up and the stuff that's come up a lot, and prioritize those fixes, things like that. But it's not I don't have these extensive bug databases and, tracking everything to a vast degree. It's more kind of at a, I mean, this is a step up from when I did all this on paper, which was up until like 3 or 4 years ago. So,
okay. So it sounds like you've basically got one very large backlog and you're just kind of going through that effectively.
Yeah, I mean, there's for every app I've done, people email in and they have like, here are 13 ideas for your product, and I'll read through them and I'll go, oh, that's actually a pretty good idea. That's a terrible idea, But I'll note them all down and kind of try and rank them and come up with, there's never a shortage of things to do. Even the Dice app, which you think, oh, the Dice app is really a simple thing. It's like that document is huge at this point, because as soon as people start using it, they're like, oh, it's really great for D&D, but it doesn't work very well with, I don't know, Shadowrun or some other game system. And it's like, could you do this thing? Or could you do custom dice? And it's like, that was one of the things that came up. It's like, could I do custom dice where you can put like any image or any text on the side of any dice? And it's like, well, that sounds fairly simple. You just draw it on the side. And it's not. And it took me like multiple steps of learning how to do something to even approach it. And like the last step was actually calculating stuff on the GPU to do the carving into the side of the dice. So to basically give it an image and then from that produce what's called a normal map, right, which has the kind of like shows where the depth are.
Is, yeah.
Yeah. And to do that required learning about core image and doing chaining together a bunch of core image filters in a row to approximate what I'd been doing previously in Photoshop. And then all that runs on the GPU, and finding out whether it's actually the performance is okay, and it was, and finding out how to optimize stuff. And so there was all these stages, and then it's like, well, now you need to write a UI for putting custom text in or custom images in and stuff. Also, none of this code is shipped because I wrote it over the last 2 or 3 months, and currently the App Store app review queues are who knows how long. So it was sitting in a queue for about 5 days, and then all the cursor stuff came out, and I was like, okay, I'm going to need to do some stuff, and I don't have because they haven't released the GM Xcode yet, so you can't, and none of the APIs, so you can't really do much, but you can do some stuff with the hover things, which I was doing in the Catalyst app, but I'd switched them off deliberately in the iOS app, and it's like, well, now I need to switch them back on again. So that point really got away from me there, but it was
a very long list of backlog, is what you're saying. There's lots and lots of things.
It's a long list of backlog, and it's kind of so I have all these ideas of things to do, and then it's a kind of what is a feasible amount of stuff to do in a release? Because I mean, you could sit there for a year working away on stuff, and that doesn't really help. You might as well break it up into a series of smaller releases. And it's like, well, I'd like to do this in this release. Or you start something and then you think, actually, this is way easier than I thought it would be, or this is way harder than I thought it would be. So, either move this up in my schedule in my head or move it down again. And I have a big text document of stuff that I want to do in PCalc, which has been around for ages.
20 years.
Well, 28 years if you want to count it. So with that stuff, it's there's things in there which are a simple one-liner like replace the entire maths library, and there's a lot to that, and it's like, well, to get there, I need to do the following sub steps. It's like, so let's start working on those sub steps, and then to work on those, I'll need to do other things, and then it's hopefully at some point the big feature falls out.
So you've made basically a Jira epic in a text file, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
and smaller milestones. We've got a question here from Yix, is this pre-recorded? No, all that stuff about him setting his career on fire is totally live. He's making stuff as he goes along. So it's not pre-recorded.
I'm sort of glancing at the stream out the corner of my eyes and seeing somebody saying, "Wow, PCalc is older than me." Yeah, I get that a lot, and that's always disturbing.
Well, the thing is, obviously it works, because I'm thinking back. I've had it for quite a while. There's only been one very, very serious bug in all that time. And that was the one with my donation thing got wiped somehow. And he fixed that overnight, and you did a credit for something or other behind the scenes. But that was it. In all this time, that's the only major bug I can think about. So clearly it's working for you.
Well, I mean, there have been other bugs. I mean, I'm not going to lie. And it's a process, there is a kind of a thing I always think about, where people say that software is done or finished or whatever, and it never is. And it's like a point, like with Apple's OS releases, they're working on them internally, and they're sort of turning a build every week. And then they're trying to refine that process and get down to a point where they have something that they can ship and that will ship on time. Sometimes they have problems with that, as we all do. But, it's like as I said, with the supporting Apple's new features, the typical time you'll do that is when iOS 13, 14, 15 or whatever roll out. So you have a deadline for those kind of releases, for the supporting new Apple stuff, big releases. That's a sort of line in the sand in September. And usually, and we're not sure what's going to happen this year, but the expectation will be sometime in June we'll probably get Apple releasing beta versions of stuff and new SDKs, and some of that might be rough, but you can get an idea of what's possible or where they're going on things.
What's the direction of travel, basically, is what they're going to try and give us.
Yeah. And then you're kind of trying to match speed alongside them, if you see what I mean, and just sort of so you go over the finish line at the same point that they do.
Yeah. And
that's often especially last year, that was a very interesting process because there were a lot of things that I wanted to do, which I didn't get to because of problems with the SDKs or functionality that Apple pulled at the last minute or whatever. So there was, and just running out of time and life getting in the way, which life always does. It's a very fluid process of trying to do these things, but because it's just. Somebody asked in the chat because I say we, the we is myself and my wife. That is the entire company, and my wife handles all the sort of businessy sides of things. Anything that involves money and the like. And I just make all the dumb decisions and write the code, and I do the tech support and things like that. But it is just the two of us. So. What that I think makes it a lot easier because if I have an idea for something small, I can, turn around and try it and implement it, see if it works, and do that in a very rapid turnaround. And I'm not sort of waiting on collaborators or, having a discussion as to whether the idea is good or not. Because generally, I have such an ego that I'll think, of course, the idea is good.
Okay. I had a question here from Jason. He asks, did PCalc start as a Mac app? Because today we know it's available on macOS, iOS, tvOS, and watchOS, even tvOS. So it'd be great to know the evolution of that a little bit, but also at this point, how much code you're sharing. I mean, presumably the core maths bit, the bit you want to tear out and replace with the new maths library, that bit is shared, but large parts aren't. But I'd love to know more about that.
Okay, so there is an interesting sort of lineage of through the code. Going way back, when I was doing a computing science degree, and this would be 1991, one of the courses that I was doing was user interface design. And I've told this story in a number of places, so apologies to anyone who's heard it. But one of our projects for the course was to design in HyperCard, for those who remember HyperCard, a central heating control panel. So just the kind of thing that you would see where you would have the temperature, you'd have some buttons to put the temperature up and down and maybe set it at a certain thing, turn it off and on, kind of thing that you'd see on the wall, or at least before the advent of smart thermostats and the like. And for that, I designed a bunch, because I sort of over-engineer everything that I do. I designed a bunch of fake LCD graphics and buttons and things. So it looked like a real one, or as real as it could be on a 1-bit 512 by 342 display.
Right.
And after that, we had started doing some Pascal programming, and we were using originally Turbo Pascal and then Think Pascal. And all we were doing was kind of just basic, like processing text files levels of stuff. But I soon realized that the tools that we had all the Mac libraries and APIs in them as well. And I thought, I wonder if I could make, I'm getting pretty good at doing the sort of low-level code. I wonder if I could make an app. And so I bought the Inside Macintosh books at the time and sat down and just sort of read through them in the summer. And I was like, let's see if I can do this. And my test project was, I thought, well, I'll build a calculator because I've got these graphics that I did, this fake 7-segment LCD and these buttons, and I'll reuse them. And the easiest thing I can reuse them in is a calculator.
So folks, so many folks, I think, will think, yeah, I'll just do a quick calculator. And we do, and we stop there. You're here 20 years later with the world's most advanced calculator for Mac OS and iOS and similar.
I mean, it was a test project, and it's always been a test project. And it was the small thing that I wrote as the first app to before I wrote the next app, and I never really expected it to continue or to take off or whatever. But then, like, it's been rewritten about 4 or 5 times, and so let me get the order of this right. So I did the first version, and it was written in Pascal. I then hand translated the core engine of that from Pascal into C, and I wrote C++ and PowerPlant, which was the MetroWorks Code Warrior user interface tool. I wrote, which was kind of a proto interface buildery type thing, where you do the interface in one tool. And then I rewrote it again using Apple's HI Toolbox stuff, which came later on. And that was the point where I had a macOS 10 version, and I used it as my making a Carbon app that would run on macOS 10 and macOS 9 at the same time. Sometime along that timeline, the dashboard widgets came along. And for dashboard widgets, you could do a native code plugin. So what you could do is write the user interface in CSS and HTML, but have a back-end thing that did all the actual hard work. So I took the code that I had and I stripped out pretty much all the user interface and Carbon-specific bits, and I had this engine, and I put that in the widget. When the phone came around, and at this point I'd not written any app kit or anything like that. I was purely doing Carbon stuff.
All Carbon at the time. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So when the phone came around, I was like, well, I need to learn how to do UIKit. And so I'm learning UIKit before I learned AppKit.
Okay.
And I thought, again, like all of this sort of reaching and finding the useful thing in your back pocket, I had this library, which was the dashboard widget engine, which had no ties to the user interface from Carbon. And I was like, I can use that, and I can quickly write a UIKit wrapper around that. And that was what the first version of PCalc was, or first version on iOS. And then what happened was that grew over time, and I added more and more functionality to it, like things like the layout editing and a whole bunch of stuff. And so that engine grew and grew and grew. And I had this Mac version written in Carbon, which was running quite behind in like functionality, and I was kind of iOS first at this point. So what I did then was I took the iOS app and I ported that to the Mac way before Catalyst or anything like this.
Right.
So you're following along at home,
Yeah.
the number of hops that this code has made. And a lot of the stuff, because I was doing a lot of custom UI, it was effectively a case of, swapping the UI views for NS views, wiring up some of the things different, and, the preference window and a lot of that stuff is different code. But currently the case is a lot, like all the kind of underneath the UI is all the same code. The UI code has diverged, and that's why some functionality is in one and isn't in others. Like the layout editing, all the back-end stuff is there. So like the Mac version can support a custom layout that you save and export from the iOS version and load into the Mac version. But I haven't rewritten the editing code on the Mac. Where this brings us to is Catalyst and technologies like that. If I can write the whole thing, or at least as much as I can in one place, and have it running on the other place, that would be ideal. And that's what now the Dice app has become my test app. So the Dice app is where I'm experimenting with things. So I'm experimenting with Catalyst. I'm experimenting with sharing as much code as possible, experimenting with multi-window support, which isn't something that the current PCalc supports. It used to support it on the Mac, and it now doesn't, because the code that came from iOS was effectively, has it at its core is a dashboard widget. And the analogy that I've used a number of times, if anyone has seen the film Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I'm going to spoil the ending of Star Trek: The Motion Picture here.
It's what, 40 years old now, right? So I think possibly safe on that one. In that, there's the Voyager probe that was sent out from Earth, has all these layers and layers of stuff built around it, and has become this sort of sentient being roaming the galaxy. And that is exactly what the PCalc code is right now. Nice. So let's just briefly, you mentioned about iOS and macOS and Catalyst, and Domain Objects asking a question here, which is very relevant right now, about how we feel about the new cursor support for iOS coming. It's landing now, because you already worked with this, haven't you? You've already been noodling around with the hover stuff, that pop-up control you made. So Are you looking forward to this functionality?
Yeah, I mean, the hover stuff. So when I was doing the Catalyst thing, one of the things that came up was it would be really nice to have a pop-up button control that could display a menu. And I wrote it for the Catalyst app, but it actually proved to be quite useful. And I kind of tried to make it so that it would work well with touch and it would work well with a mouse. It's kind of, it doesn't work perfectly in both sides, but it works enough that it was better than what I had. And for that, on the Catalyst side, they have the UI hover gesture recognizer, which is just like you can move a mouse over something and you can see the mouse moving from the code, and it works a lot like all the other gesture recognizers. So I wired that up for the Catalyst side, and now they've basically unlocked exactly the same functionality on the iOS side. So I literally just needed to go in and change an if-def, and all that code worked perfectly. So I got all that code that I did, because I did it for Catalyst. It was for free. And any improvements that I now make on one side apply to the other side. The other stuff that they are going to add, which we haven't officially seen any of the APIs for, are really sort of visual things. It's kind of like the little effect when you move the cursor over.
In and goes around. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And all that is really cosmetic, and that doesn't, as far as we know so far, they're not planning on wiring that up on the Mac side on Catalyst. At least there's been no sign of it so far, but who knows? And so like today, you can do all of this stuff. If you think of it like the functionality and the cosmetic side separately, you can get all the functionality of mousing over and clicking on things and doing stuff. You can get that working right now nicely. And then you can pretty it up when we get the final APIs. I mean, the Dice app that is currently sitting in app review, that I just exposed all these things that I was using in the Catalyst app, and it works really well. And once we get the final SDK, I will stick another build in the queue once I've had a chance to officially play with those APIs. I have played with them because, the usual suspects have been messing around with them and seeing what they do.
STS. Also, I saw Peter Steinberger doing a great job of figuring it out behind the scenes. Just basically digging until it worked, basically.
So, that's another example of people in the community helping each other. It was a case of I was like, so how does this API work? And, somebody will say, oh, try this. Then it was a case of just sort of messing around. I mean, you can do the basic stuff really simply. It's just, if you've ever used the drag and drop interactions, which you can add to views, then it's the same kind of thing. And you just create these pointer interaction things and you can set some properties on them. And that's probably enough to make it look quite nice. And then there's more stuff you can do to control cursor shapes and things like that.
Yeah. So I've got stacks of other questions for you, but before I move on, there's one thing particularly I can't avoid asking about, which is the About screen, which is an application all by itself, right? It's a remarkable thing. If folks haven't seen it before, it's a what is it, James? Like a playground of 3D SceneKit love?
Yeah. So what this came out of. Everything I do in my apps generally is how can I learn something new? And I think that is a great thing to try and do if you can, is I say adopting these APIs because they're new and you might get featured out of it. That is one sort of axis of this. But learning a new thing is always good. And I'd done some 3D graphic stuff back at university a long time ago on SGI workstations. And I hadn't really done anything since that point. And there were a lot of rumblings that Apple was looking at AR in a big way, and possibly looking at AR in a big way because of future products, So whether you're going to be wearing AR glasses in a few years' time, who knows? But it seems like Apple's investing more heavily in AR than is justified by what they're currently doing with AR. And, we've seen leaks of there are products in the works, and whether these things actually make it to a product, like an actual product, is still an open question. But, they're clearly working on something. So I started with that as I would like to learn about doing AR. How does one start with that? And it's best way, if you're going to be on Apple platforms to do that, is to use SceneKit as your 3D engine. Because Apple's done a lot with SceneKit. It's a very high-level, object-oriented thing. It's kind of make a box, put it here. That box has, this weight, these physics properties. Now run everything, and a physics engine will run it, and things like that. And I was like, okay, this seems fun. And this, people who have seen the talk that I did on Easter eggs will know that part of my attraction to all this stuff was some of the 3D things that were in Apple's little Easter eggs in the OS going back into the 90s. And I wanted, my goal was, can I make a 3D version of the icon for my app, which is just sitting in the About screen, which you can move around. And I had been doing some stuff that summer with making alternative app icons. I got into this thing of I did a few alternative app icons and people liked them. So I did more of them, and then I did more of them. And PCalc currently has something like 48 alternative app icons that you can pick. And part of that, I started, how can I do different ones? Because I'm not an artist. I'm not very good at it. But I can mess around with stuff in the 3D software package until it looks nice. Make it look chrome, shine a nice light on it, that kind of thing. So what I did was, as part of that, I had a 3D model of the icon, which I built. And I was like, let's take this, let's import this, we'll put it in the SceneKit scene file. And it's like, I now have a thing. I can move a light. I can, shine a light on it and have a light that's sort of circling this icon. And then I was like, let's play with it. There's a physics engine. What happens if I assign physics to these objects? And it's like, what if I had other objects? And it's like, What's an interesting object? Bananas are an interesting shape. What happens if you threw a banana at this icon? And it's like, oh, it bounces off. This is quite good. What happens if you drop 500 bananas on it? And it's like, the performance is terrible. Why is the performance terrible? And kind of, it was an exploring, because I didn't have any real background in 3D graphics or, performance optimization of 3D stuff. And it was like, I basically worked my way through the SceneKit APIs. And I was like working through them. And then it's like, oh, there's a vehicle API. Like you can take a model, you can say, these are 4 wheels, and you can spin the wheels and you can turn the wheels. And it's basically, you have a little car. And it's like, what if I put a little car in this? And then I put a little car in it and you could drive it around. It's like, okay, what happens if I put a ramp? I could build a ramp in a 3D graphics package. It's just a triangle extruded out. So I built a ramp and I drove the car at it, and the car like jumped into the air and did this sort of real magnificent jump. And I thought, this is amazing. and it was just that kind of, and that's where it led to like, well, let's make a little assault course that this car can drive around and jump through hoops. And then if you delve deeper into the about screen, there's a whole city that you can drive around in, and there's a castle. And then it was like, I wonder if I could make my own like thing. So I said, well, let's try and make a helicopter. And it's like, how would you make the physics engines for a helicopter? And it's like, well, let's think of it not like a helicopter. Let's think of it like a quadcopter. Like, let's take this thing and mount 4 virtual sort of thrusters underneath it. Could I do something like that auto balanced itself? And that's an interesting problem to try and solve. And it's like, so I made this is not a physically accurate simulation of a helicopter by any means, but it was a fun thing to try and like do this. And the SceneKit APIs are really nice. I enjoy them a lot in the kind of stuff that you can do. And it was just a process of go through the APIs, look at each section of it. The Ray Wenderlich site has a ton of really good tutorials on SceneKit, and I worked through a lot of those. And it was like, how do I do this? How does this work? And so for each thing, it was kind of like, learn how to do this thing. And then that worked into, let's try and do a bit of it in AR. And I did some AR stuff, and it's dumb, but it was like, let's let it so you can write your name in the air and then move around it and look at it. And it's like, well, but it's fun to play with.
Well, it's fun for us to play with for sure, and presumably you're enjoying making it, which is why you're exploring further and further and further.
Yeah, and it was, but all of it is I'm trying to learn something. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to post videos of me learning, because if you followed me that summer, you saw me slowly losing my mind as I gradually posted more and more videos of like, and now there's a car, and now there's this, and I got a review on Mac Stories. I can't remember if it was John or Federico. I think it was John. Actually reviewed the About screen that year. Like, it wasn't a review of PCalc. It was just a straight standalone review of the About screen for my calculator. And I thought, you couldn't buy publicity like that.
So someone asked here in the chat here, Josh Holt is asking, are you still secretly adding more things to the About screen? Is it still a work of production?
So what happened out of that, and a lot of this stuff, it's like previous things feeding into next things. So last year, Mike Hurley and a bunch of people wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. And there's The Incomparable, which is a podcast network run by Jason Snell, has a podcast on it called Total Party Kill, where a bunch of people sit and play Dungeons and Dragons. And it's mostly people around the sort of, it's friends of Jason's, but it's also people in the sort of Apple community. I mean, we had Tiff Armett and people like that. And they wanted to do a UK version. So I had played D&D in my youth. And so I was roped into this. Roped in is too strong a word. I jumped at the chance because I haven't played D&D in longer than many people in the chat room have been alive. And indeed, as it turned out, how long Mike had been alive, because Mike was younger than the last time I had played D&D. So as part of that, we were going along doing stuff, and I think we'd recorded our first episode, and I'd been messing around with all these 3D physics things. And Jason said, I'm surprised you haven't done like a dice app or some, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was kind of something that my brain went, because I did have dice in the about screen, just normal 6-sided ones. And it's like, well, how difficult could it be, So I prototyped it in the about screen, so you could then drop polyhedral dice of various shapes, and it would tot up what the results were. And I was like, I could do something like this. So I gave myself a week to make a new app from hitting new project, using all the skills that I'd learned and pretty much none of the code. And then could I make a dice rolling app? And I got it from new project to shipping on the store in 2 weeks, which was pretty good. I mean, I had a prototype that was working basically in a week, and I thought, well, I'll ship it in 2 weeks. And that is kind of the about screen. The about screen has escaped from PCalc, and my knowledge and my playing with stuff has gone into that. And I mean, I should point out the about screen got to the point where I actually hired a composer who did music for the about screen. It got a bit silly, but anyway.
So someone's asked in the chat window about dice and about the about screen. They all seem to love it very much, it looks like. Someone's also asked why I keep looking around the screen. What you can't see, folks, is this is a live stream. I'm asking these questions to James. He's answering live, and I've got Skype recording, I've got chat window, I've got our video screen, I've got audio levels going on, I've got all sorts going on in the thing. And it's quite a lot to take care of right now. But with dice particularly, that is a great example of where you can sell your byproducts. Like, for example,
Yes.
when I'm writing about SwiftUI, I'm writing about how to do cool things in SwiftUI. Along the way, I'm figuring things out. How do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And all I do is I take those things and make them articles, really short articles. How do I do this thing in SwiftUI? Here is how I've done it. Literally, here's the exact code I just wrote to solve the problem. I might have refactored it many times. It was broken to begin with, and it becomes a new online resource. And it was never planned to be that way. It just kind of became that way. And DICE is that. You had this wonderful, advanced not AR, it's a SceneKit system, plus an extraordinary passion for trying things out, and it became its own product.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of the stuff when I was learning things in for the about screen and with SceneKit, it was like I never took anything out. All the little experiments and things, like how do I build a helicopter? There's a helicopter at the bottom right-hand corner of the map. If you go find that, you can fly it around.
Oh, look for these things now.
And it was like, just ship it all, even if it's silly, even if it's like, well, there's a castle and there's a panda wearing a crown at the center of the castle. Just put it in, because occasionally I get a message from somebody who's been using PCalc for years and who has stumbled and has somehow missed the whole about screen thing and has stumbled into it and has spent several hours just falling down this rabbit hole of things, and they emerge kind of blinking into the light. And that's a wonderful feeling, because I did that with about screens a long time ago. And if I can sort of inspire somebody to do something silly or whatever, it's I wouldn't say paying it forward, because it's more like unleashing a curse on future generations. But and with the dice stuff, it was like using that knowledge to come up with a product that might actually be useful to somebody, because the dice not useful at all, but sorry, the about screen is not useful, but the dice app, people are actually buying it and using it. But a lot of it is also learning stuff. And with the dice, it's like, say Apple introduces a new way of doing lighting or materials, or like they did reflections, which was something that appeared in iOS 13. So you could have two metal dice next to each other that reflect off each other. And it's a great playground for that. The other thing with dice and with the about screen, I mean, I started the about screen in 2016. And as you may remember, 2016 wasn't a great year. And I mean,
unlike 2020.
unlike 2020, which is going great. But the point of that was it was an escape. And it was I want to do something fun. I want to do something that is going to occupy my brain. I want to do something that is going to help my mental health. And a lot of this stuff is kind of finding ways to, and this will feed back into the whole conversation about working for home and indie life and working for yourself. And it's like, how do you stay sane doing all this stuff? Some may argue that I've skirted those boundaries quite a bit, but DICE is that as well. It's like, the last month has been pretty difficult for a lot of people, myself included. And it's nice to have something that I can play with, that I can do stuff with, that's not like, DICE is a small part of our income stream. It's a nice part, it's not nothing, but it's very small. And the amount of work that I spent on it recently does not, that's not in proportion to the amount of money it makes. It's more in proportion to how fun it's been. And working on something that can make me a bit happier, or, take my mind off stuff. There's different bits of code will work in different ways for me. And like one thing that I can do now, which is a silly thing, is like I can design a new set of dice, just the textures and the, so it's like, it's like a nice set of wooden dice with a little sort of metallic silver inlay on them and things like that. And it's like, that'll take me half an hour or an hour or something to do that. But I can sit down. It's a little thing I can do. It's a very small self-contained thing. And then I have a new set of dice that I can put in the app. But it's something that can take my mind off stuff and de-stress me, and is a very kind of, there's people who will sit down, and I do this too. One of the things I find in video games right now, and I've found this for a long time, so it's not just related to current stuff, is there's games that let you build something, whether it's The Sims or, I played a lot of Fallout 4, had things where you could build bases. So you got an area of land and you could sort of it's like Lego, virtual Lego really. Or people who play No Man's Sky and are building, these highly elaborate sculptures and all sorts of things. It's that kind of same itch of, here's something that I can control 100%. I can sit down and I can build a thing, and at the end I will have a thing. And while I'm doing that, I'm not thinking about the world. I might have a podcast on in the background or something, but I'm kind of, there's something about that act of creation and those kind of games and this stuff as well, where it's really nice, It's a nice thing to do, and it's a fun escape. And other code doesn't work that same way. Like when I'm working on PCalc, at some points PCalc feels like a job. It's a proper job. You sit down. Here are the things that I need to do. Here are the things that people are expecting me to do. I have to make these deadlines. I have to do this. There's a sort of a bunch of stress involved in that. Especially when I don't manage to do the thing that I want to do. In a particular time frame, like last summer, there was like 3 or 4 major items that I wanted to get done, and I couldn't get them done in time, so I had to ship what I had. And so there's like, I try and think of it as recreational coding versus, work coding. And coding is also still my hobby as well as my work. So a lot of the DICE stuff I've been doing in the evenings, so I'll work on PCalc during the day, and I'll work on DICE in the evening.
Nice.
And it's a nice way to unwind, and it's a working on something where there isn't an economic pressure associated with it, or a business pressure, because people are playing D&D with this. It's not life or death. Some of the PCalc things some of the things people use PCalc for are life and death. Somebody wrote to me telling me how they were using it to calculate anesthesia amounts for children. And you think, I don't want to get that wrong.
And you still want to consider replacing your maths library one day. That's super brave.
Well, that's partially why it's not happened. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I need to do in terms of adding a lot more unit testing and stuff, so that I know if I make a change to the low-level stuff, it's all still good, or better. And yeah, there are things like that where it's like it kind of stops and makes you think. I mean, there are people I know who bought PCalc, and this was a while ago, at the facility at the United States that constructs and maintains the nuclear arsenal. You know, so you have two ends of that. There's like nuclear weapons and the health of children. Those are pressures that can get a little bit disturbing. So dice is nice and low stakes, you know, unless I find out that people are using dice to make, you know, serious decisions, but I don't want to know. But it's a fun thing.
It's hard for folks who are just now working from home for the first time, because they're enforced to. You know, a lot of folks are self-isolating or quarantined or stay-at-home orders, whatever happens to be, and they're at home now trying to do their job at home for the very first time. And I think for many of them, they're finding it very hard. They're anxious, they're worried, and similar. And it's great to hear you say you feel the same way. Even though you've been doing it for a long time, this current period, this coronavirus, COVID-19 mess is not normal. It's really not how it normally is.
I mean, like, I have the working from home stuff down perfect. Well, I say perfectly. That's not true. But, you know, I've been doing it for 20 years successfully. So, you know, that's good. But I'm finding it really hard to work right now. You know, even with the perfect setup, with this new wonderful desk, I've got an app. I can make my desk go up and down with an app. It's brilliant. And I've spent a lot of time, you know, you see the Star Wars figures behind me. What you can't see in front of me is I have a whole bunch of signed comic book art signed by artists that I really like. And so I've created this little workspace, which is, you know, anywhere I look, you know, there's nice things. I've got some of my old childhood space Lego sitting on a shelf right there. I've got a bunch of like Wonder Woman figures and Harley Quinn figures, and there's a Star Wars section, you know. So I got rid of what my shelves were covered in, like old Apple developer discs, and that was what I saw from my desk. And I was like, why do I have 20-year-old developer discs? There's no point to this. I think I sent them all to Steve Trott-Smith, as it turned out. And then I replaced it all with nice stuff. So I have, thanks BB-Edit. I don't want to install an update right now. I've got all this stuff around me. I've made this perfect working environment, or as perfect as I can do it. And still, I'm finding it incredibly hard to work, you know, to actually sit down and do my day-to-day job. Because there's just so much going on. And it's like, and you know, in the UK, we are, as we're recording this, we're on day one of lockdown, or full lockdown. And there's scary stuff happening, and there's going to be scary stuff happening for a while. So anyone out there who hasn't done working from home, and you know, and is thinking, oh, I'm not doing this right because I'm finding it really hard to focus or whatever. I'm finding it really hard to focus as well. You know, so why I'm messing around with the Dice app right now, because it's like, go to my comfort place. Yeah. You know, this is like the sort of sitting, eating pizza and wine gums and whatever of development. It's there's people who are like working from home, and they have a family around them. They have kids who are now studying from home as well, or not studying, as the case may be. And there's people don't have the right computers or setup, or maybe they've got one computer and the kids need to use it for their schoolwork and they need to use it for doing their job. And it's not a perfect environment. But even if you have the perfect environment, don't feel bad right now that you are having trouble focusing, because everyone is. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there not a lot of people talk about mental health and things like that. And there's a lot of aspects of that for working for yourself and working from home. And it's going to take a lot of people a lot of time to adjust, even in the best circumstances. And we're probably way far away from best circumstances right now. Not to get too heavy about things, but it's more to say to people, cut yourself a break, because it's going to be hard. And if it takes you weeks and months to get into the mode where you can actually work, that's normal. There are things you can do. That's one of the things we can talk about, is in terms of how to create a good environment for working from home. One of the things that I do, which I'm luckily able to do, is we have one of the rooms of our flat or apartment, if you're an American, is our office. It's also the spare room where people come and stay if we have guests. But so it's got a fold-out bed, but it has 2 desks in it, and so we know generally if we're in this room, we're working,
right,
and if we're in another room, we're not working.
So there's a clear division between your home life and I am now at the actual job now. It might be dice, but it's still working.
Yeah, and those lines get blurry. And, I will sit on the sofa in an evening and I'll be answering tech support emails or something like that, things that are low stress or whatever. But I don't have any social media or anything on my iMac, which I'm sitting in front of now. And all of that is on my 2015 MacBook Pro, which is got all my email and all that stuff on it. So I can I know that if I'm sat in front of this computer, this is work time, and my brain is reasonably good at doing that. And yes, I can do that because I have the space to do it, and I have 2 separate machines. But there are things that you can do. You could have 2 accounts on your machine if you only have one machine, or you could have accounts for the kids and things. And you could have when I'm logged into this account, this is work, or just setting yourself hours of the day is another thing. If you can say it is 10 o'clock, I am going to work, and then I'm going to have a break from 12 to 1, and then I'm going to work from 1 to 5 or whatever it is, and I'm going to try and not work outside those hours, and I'm going to try and not sit on Twitter talking about nonsense or reading about pandemics incessantly, which I've certainly not been doing for the last few weeks, and just try and have that sort of separation is really helpful for your brain. And noise cancelling headphones are great if you're if you can afford them, and if you're in an environment where there's noise of other people. I've been using the AirPod Pro noise cancelling for my kind of desk work just now. I don't have any full over-ear noise cancelling headphones. But those are really helpful in getting you that focus if you can do it. And I know it's difficult for a lot of people because, if you have kids running in and running up to you, that's it's hard. And there might be a period of trying to explain to them that, just because, mummy or daddy is here does not mean that, this is the weekend or whatever. And if you can do it, signs on the door or something, some kind of indication to other people that, the equivalent of a do not disturb sign.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be enforceable 100% of the time, but especially if you're in the house by yourself and you have kids there, that's obviously not as easy to do. But there are things that you can do to kind of like having a nice environment around you, as I was saying.
That sounds really critical, doesn't it? Because you've mentioned, this Mac or this desktop or this user is my work user. These time frames or this room in my house. So really, it sounds like getting the right environment so you are in work mode. This is work time now. Is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some people, like some of the BBC correspondents who have set up little workstations inside a wardrobe, because it's got good sound qualities, so they can sit in there with a microphone and they can do things and recording. You can be creative with things. You could, like, if you've not got multiple rooms, you could like rope off one section of your room in some fashion, stick a clothesline up in somewhere and put a blanket across it. And it's like, this is the living room, this is the office, and just sort of try and subdivide it.
Yeah, certainly it sounds like having a different user on your Mac is almost like the modern day equivalent of the old, don't work from home in your dressing gown or something, actually get dressed like you really mean it,
I mean, that is an important part as well. Like, don't sit around in your pajamas all day. Don't work in your pajamas. Yeah, I'm not saying that you have to be wearing a suit and tie. I'm wearing a nice DICE-related T-shirt here, but I'm wearing comfortable sweatpants on the bottom of the stream that you can't see. But it's like, don't, make some effort, wash all of these things that are kind of seem like they should be obvious, but have that sort of, make an effort for yourself kind of thing is important. And, don't have snacks at your desk is another one.
I've seen folks who have switches at their desk, like Nintendo switches. I'm like, how do you do that? I couldn't do that. I'm too easily distracted with a switch being right there.
Yeah, I mean, having, like, just because you have access to all the entertainment devices in your house, and like Disney Plus launched here today, and so I've just instantly got another 1,000 billion hours of content. But just because you have all that stuff, don't bring it into your work environment. The snack stuff is more a long-term thing. Like, I put on a ton of weight, like, after I started doing this, because, one of the things, especially now, it's harder to get out, but, working from home, you're not moving as much, so you're effectively sedentary lifestyle. If you eat whatever you want, you'll start to put on weight. And I did that over a period of, well, a good 18 years or something. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've kind of been trying actively more to keep that under control. And I did buy myself an exercise machine, which is sitting in the living room gathering dust as we speak. And I'm going to try and work that into my loose schedule to get more exercise. I mean, we can still go outside, but if you sit and eat anything, it's going to be bad for your system. And sitting in a chair all the time is also bad for your system, as anyone who does it, even in an office knows. So looking after your health, getting up. I mean, these are more longer term things, but it's all important. And I think, exercise and stuff has been proven to have an effect on mental health.
Yes.
So if you let any of this stuff to start to slide, it can snowball, and it all starts to affect each other. Even in, as we've been saying, even in the best possible situation that you're in, and we're not in the best possible situation.
So certainly, I found that under normal circumstances, if I'm doing some research or some experimentation, I can work really hard on a thing for a day or two, and it ends up being a dud. Right, it gets nowhere. It didn't pan out like I planned. It's not fast enough, no matter how I optimize it, whatever it is. It's just not going to work. And those suck under normal circumstances. But I'm seeing more of them right now, because normally if I hit a wall, if I get stuck, I think, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'll go for a bike ride, or I'll have a nap, something to try and break the blockage of my brain. But right now, when I have my breaks, I don't nap. I check the news. And right now, it's the worst, most destructive thing for my mental health, I think, right now, is to check the news, because it's really grim out there and going to get worse. And so I'm not getting those speed bump removing devices I normally rely on, like naps and similar, I don't have them so much right now because I'm anxious about everything else. So I get more off days where I get nothing done, or I've tried and still have nothing to show for it.
Yeah, and I've done that too. And I've sat and I was like, well, let's work on this feature, and I'll work on it for 2 days and I'll get to the end of it. And it's like, this isn't going to work, because I've discovered some limitations or something about my approach wasn't right. But, this is a dead end. And I mean, that is a general thing of working for yourself in indie stuff. There is going to be experimentation which doesn't get anywhere. It's not, I said ship everything, but of course I didn't ship everything. I shipped the things that were fun. But yeah, it is hard to, I mean, one thing I've been doing, like I've built up this huge backlog of books and, like comics and things like that. And it's like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just take some time to read one of these things, try and do that once a day. Because I've got this big stack of them, which have been, Christmas and birthdays, people buy you things. And it's like, well, let's sit down, take some time out and, not spend the time looking at social media or, watching messages to the nation and that sort of stuff. Let's find some distraction, and that's not, you shouldn't feel guilty for that.
No.
At all. I mean, with all this stuff, you shouldn't feel guilty. There is a point, if you're just lying around in your pajamas eating ice cream and you're supposed to be doing a day job, there is another extreme to it. But, you should kind of treat yourself, we managed to get out to the supermarket to do like basically a couple of weeks worth of supplies because we're not planning on going out at all as much as we can. And it was like, I'm going to buy the chocolate biscuits. I wouldn't normally buy the chocolate biscuits, but I think I deserve a chocolate biscuit every now and again. And it's stuff like that. It's kind of like, and we're in a great position now where a lot of the stuff we can get is digital. So, if you want a new game for your Switch, or you want a film, or you want a comic, or something like that, there are ways to get all that stuff as well. So, take advantage of that stuff. And it's like, if you're thinking, oh, I should have always played so-and-so game, you can play it in moderation,
Yeah.
But,
so listeners, I'm saying this direct to listeners here, honestly, take care of yourselves. Do not feel guilty about having 0 days or more timeouts or more breaks or more ice cream, whatever happens to be that works for you. Particularly right now, it is stressful. Please take care of yourselves. Now, there's a few more questions from the live stream here because a large number is streaming in, and I wanted to have a taste of those really fast, see what we can get through. One here from, it looks like a Total Guy. I'm curious, do you think Apple might use WWDC 2020 to really produce a decent online conference experience? Since first release of iTunes U, nothing much news happened. So Apple haven't got a particularly glorious history of online services, I think, let's put it that way. And doing a whole conference, presumably with some sort of lab something, we're not quite sure what. That's a real step up for them, I think. How do you think it's going to pan out?
I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, one of the things that's happened in the last couple of weeks is Google cancelled even its online stuff. So we might be at a situation where we don't get WWDC.
No, don't say that. Don't say that. It's Christmas. Don't say that.
I mean, it doesn't mean that stuff might not get released or information might, because we had all the stuff in 13.4, which is kind of like stuff that we would have got at WWDC. And we might just get a gradual rollout of functionality over the year. That's one possibility. And I have no knowledge of what Apple are planning. But, you know, even putting together a good online thing might be hard in the current situation. And if everybody's working from home, you can do some stuff. I mean, you can certainly do like slides with voiceover. That's, you know, you could do that to the professional quality that Apple has done their talks before, you know, very nicely polished and presented. But, you know, we might not get the slick video talks and things like that. I'm interested in seeing what they do and what they can do. But, as we're saying, like with our mental state and stuff, it's going to be the same for all the people at Apple who are currently trying to put all this stuff together, and not just put together talks and virtual conferences and things, but finish off operating system features. And like we were talking about it before, like app review is running quite slow at the moment, about at least a week more than normal. And, under normal circumstances, I'd be, on Twitter grumbling and saying, oh, Apple terrible. And I'm just thinking, like, all these app review people who, are, it should be pointed out, people are under the same kind of situations that we're in. And they might not be working well, and they've got backlogs, and they're dealing with family, and they're dealing with other stuff. So I'm kind of like, I don't want to like set the expectation super high for this, that this is going to be the slickest, most innovative distance learning whatever thing, because it might not be. It might be that Apple doesn't have the cycles to do that. I mean, what I hope is that it at least starts them thinking about this. And maybe we don't get the full rollout of what they would like to do this year. Maybe we get it next year, because I mean, I would hope that, even if the world has gone back to complete normality, that this kind of stuff and, making things more available to people around the world is good for Apple. It's good for the developers. Putting that extra effort into it would be beneficial for everyone.
Yes. So a question here from TXRX, who asks, what are your thoughts about SwiftUI? Is it the future of iOS development? Is it going to replace UIKit anytime soon? What do you think, James?
I think the answer to that is probably yes and probably not. I think it's the future. I don't think it's the future in the next 2 years. Is it the future in 5 years? Probably. Is it the future in 10 years? Possibly. It's, or possibly and probably switch around there. I don't know. And, right now, there's some people doing really nice stuff with it. There's some rough edges to it. There's some stuff where you have to break out to, UIKit or AppKit or whatever. The same is true of Catalyst in some ways. I think it will be interesting to see what gets announced this year, because, there's been, I don't want to say they've had another year to work on it, because they haven't, especially in the last month or whatever. I think plans will have gone out the window for a lot of things, but it'll be interesting to see, especially to both of Catalyst and UIKit and SwiftUI, where it looks like the investment has been in terms of time, because I think that will be an interesting signifier. Like if we see sort of a whole load of new Catalyst stuff and a whole load of new SwiftUI stuff, then I think Apple is kind of, these are both good ways of doing things. And, you pick what works for you. And I think that's true of a lot of things. If you're starting a brand new project and you're thinking 2 years ahead on it, maybe SwiftUI is the place to start on that. If you have a lot of existing code base, if you're looking at doing a Mac app, Catalyst is a good thing.
Yes.
There's no one size fits all, and nothing works perfectly. If you had infinite time, for these things, it's write a bespoke app from scratch on all your platforms, but not everybody has that time.
I'm certainly curious to see how SwiftUI advances relative to UIKit, because
yes,
at this point, SwiftUI is quite a long way behind UIKit in terms of support. There's no text views, there's no collection views, there's no attributed strings and similar. And that's going to change, presumably. In WWDC 20, they're going to say, here's now collection views, here's text views, or similar. But UIKit's not sitting still, right? UIKit's going to move forward as well. And will SwiftUI be where UIKit was last year, or where UIKit is this year? Or are we always going to be sort of one release behind, or are they sort of slowly closing the gap? I just don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, another interesting thing might be, maybe not this year, maybe next year, if Apple rolls out AR devices, what are the SDKs going to be like for that? Is it going to be some UIKit variant? Or is it going to be something that they've thought through, like 3D SwiftUI, if you see what I mean? So you can imagine something along those lines, kind of.
Yes.
And that, they're not putting all this effort in for nothing. It's something that they think, it's like Swift itself. It was like, here is a thing we have made. We believe this to be the future. And Swift, what are we at? 5 years, 6 years?
About that, yeah.
Something like that. We've seen that evolving over time and becoming, if somebody said on year 1, year 0, are you going to rewrite your app in Swift? People would go, no. Some people would. Okay, some people would. But, it's not, the value proposition wouldn't have been as, good then. But if you say to somebody now, are you going to write your app in Swift? If you're writing a new app, yeah, almost certainly.
Yes.
So I think there's going to be that process for SwiftUI as well. And candidly, I am not doing either of those things. I have an awful lot of Objective-C. As I said, like, PCalc still has some routine names in it, which are the same as they were from the original Pascal version. There are variable names and there are things which are the same as the Pascal. So you could say I'm slow to adopt and some things and quick to adopt other things. But with the Dice app, it was a case of, I want to do this thing in a week. I've done a certain amount of Swift. I can read Swift, but I wouldn't say I'm fluent in it. So it was the easiest thing for me to do was to write it in Objective-C. And it's... and also SwiftUI, all the stuff that I'm doing is 3D, so SwiftUI doesn't really fit into that world as much, although you can use it for the interface things.
Yes.
But I'm taking a wait and see approach to things on SwiftUI. I do genuinely think it is the future, but I don't think it's my present.
There you go. I've got a contentious question here from Austin Conlon. What do you think of Apple's own calculator apps?
The honest thing is I never look at them. Like, I never look at other people's calculator apps either. And that's been the way that I've done it from pretty much the start. Because if you're looking at, especially another third parties thing, if they've come up with a really good idea and you think, that's a really good idea, I should put that in my own app. I don't think that that's a good way of doing development and design and things. And I kind of extend that to Apple's own things. It's like, they have some advantages. Like, they have a nice private maths library that would be very nice if I could use it, but it isn't publicly available. The UI on the calculator app that ships on the phone has to work for 2 billion people?
Exactly.
3 billion people, something like that.
Really mainstream.
Yeah, so you can't go too deep on it. And some of the stuff I don't like visually, the way some things look or how, whatever. But PCalc doesn't have to work. It'd be nice if 2 billion people bought it, but, that's not going to happen. So it just needs to work the way I think it should work, and I can try and make it not too complicated, but to have some depth to it and things like that. But it's I don't look at the other apps, and I don't if they still haven't done a calculator for the iPad. Whatever, how many years on we are. I don't imagine, and I don't know this for sure, but I imagine that they are some engineer's side project to their main project.
Well, another prescient question from Austin Conlon. What will Apple ship for iPadOS first, Xcode or calculator?
Um, Honestly, probably Xcode.
Nice.
I mean, I could see them shipping something. Like, I don't doubt that there's people writing. I mean, I don't know that we'll get Xcode, but I think, making something that was constrained, like a SwiftUI development environment that could deploy apps, I think that's feasible. A full, interface builder and supporting legacy code, and that could build PCalc with its tainted Objective-C-ness. I don't think we'll get that like anytime soon, but I could see them spending the time and making an actual development environment. I think that could happen. We might have seen this year. We might see this year. Who knows?
I think it feels a bit to me like SwiftUI is a significant step towards Xcode on iPad, because you think about some of those inspectors in an interface builder where there's potentially dozens of numbers and up and down little buttons and so forth. It would translate into gigantic sized iPad screens, huge scrolling numbers, all touch friendly. Whereas SwiftUI has a much more visual, if you want it, layout. You just drag and drop and add things and it writes the code for you, or do the code and see it reflected straight away in the layout. And that would work great on iPad because it vastly simplifies the sort of surface area of things to touch. Partly because SwiftUI is simpler, of course.
Yeah. And if they did make some development tool, it would presumably grow as SwiftUI grows. So at a point, 5 years down the line, maybe it is something that people use as their main tool. And things like the mouse support and all that do make it more feasible, because you can say, I mean, I can't see them saying, well, requires a mouse, but maybe it's easier if you have a mouse, or if it's easier if you have a trackpad or something like that.
Right.
I mean, when it comes down to it, we know it's all just, pixels on the screen. Everything's possible on either platform. But yeah, I don't think we'll see full Xcode, but I think we'll see at least partial Xcode before we see the calculator.
Okay.
But that's always the thing. It's like that feeling every time, and I've had this for more than 20 years, every time I've watched an Apple keynote, is this the year that I get Sherlocked on something?
Right.
And I literally worked on Sherlock, I should say. So,
So the question here from Yix or Yixi, and this is perhaps trying to figure out how you plan to be featured next. What new tech is James looking to incorporate into Dice/PCalc? What's on your radar for cool things you can put in there to get one of those coveted promo slots?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, I think I would like to do more with AR, because when I first messed with AR, it was the ARKit 1.0 stuff was pretty simple, and it's gone a long way, with the sort of occlusion of people and mapping out rooms and all that stuff. I would love to do something like that especially with dice, because you can see the sort of rolling virtual dice on a table would be fun. Problem with that is the SceneKit physics engine doesn't work well with really small objects. They have a habit of falling through. So if I had a table, they might fall through the table. It's not what you want. So the dice in Dice by PCalc are currently 1 meter in diameter, which wouldn't work quite as well in AR. It might be fun, but it's not as practical. So there's a few things, and I've requested some features from the SceneKit folks for being able to scale down a scene but have higher accuracy physics, that sort of thing, which would be useful for doing things like that. But I kind of would like to play with the more like the shared AR stuff. You could imagine if you have two people looking at a table, so you could both see the other person rolling dice on it, in different, parts of the country or the world. That would be fun.
And presumably Apple are going to launch some massive new framework imminently for this new LiDAR they have on the iPad Pro. I mean, that's going to do something, presumably.
I don't know. I mean, I assume that feeds into some of the existing APIs that are already there, just with more accuracy. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's more stuff for that we'll see
in June,
maybe in June or next June. Yeah, who knows?
So Emin Rublack asks, does it help to advertise your app via ads on other sites, such as sponsored posts and such?
No.
You just don't.
It's the simple answer.
You just don't do it.
I did it for a long time. So I ran Google AdWords for years and spent thousands of dollars on that. Then one day I switched it off. Nothing changed.
Wow.
And then it was a case of, that's interesting. I think if you were spending money right now, and I object to this, but I think the best thing you could do is use Apple's search ad stuff and put some money into that, because they have the simple search ads set up where you only pay money if somebody buys your app. So it doesn't matter how many people go and look at it on the store and click on it. You only pay if somebody buys it. So that's one thing that you do, where you can say, my app costs whatever it is. I'm going to spend up to, say my app costs $10. I'm going to spend up to $1 making sure that, people see adverts for it when they're searching for stuff.
Yeah.
And that way, that you're not losing money. They do have the advanced advert stuff, which is far more targetable and keywords and everything. But for that, anytime somebody clicks on your ad, it costs you money. So that one is a harder thing to do. Also, if you've never used search ads before, you get $100 of credit. And I am still running on the free credit, and made several hundred sales worth of dice out of that. So that's something you can do right now today. Just switch on the basic search ad stuff, set a reasonable thing, and use up your free credit and see how it works for you. I mean, I don't want to tout for Apple, because the problem is I don't like this, because it feels a bit like protection money.
Yeah.
Because it is the sort of like, we're already taking 30%, but why don't you pay us more money to get more visibility in the store? And that feels bad to me. But as a way to actually do something right now, that's the best thing. Like, there are some things that can work if it's like a very targeted product you have, and you can target it like, even calculators are too broad, but if you had something that was like, dice might be a good example, not that I've done it, but if I advertised on some role-playing game site, if there was some, the destination for everyone who's playing D&D, if I advertised on that, maybe that would help. But most of the time, if you're doing something like, if you're banner ads, I think just seem like 2 decades ago, but if you were doing something like banner ads, I've never had a good return on them, because most people are either filtering out advertising or, fast forwarding through advertising. I mean, advertising has a place, and I like the fact that it can help support the sites that I like, but the more sites that can move to a direct funding model with memberships and things, the better, because, advertising is, I don't want to say it's responsible for all the ills in the world, but it's kind of responsible for a lot of them.
I remember reading a long time ago, I think it was Seth Godin, I don't remember who it was, saying the key with marketing or advertising spend generally is like a pachinko machine, like a Japanese pachinko machine, where you sort of fire balls in a stream of balls upwards into this thing, and they sort of rock down and fall down into the right hole. And you turn a handle to control where the balls are going to land. And when you get the handle right, the stream of balls going in sort of becomes a stream of balls going out through the hole. And when it's wrong, you sort of fall into the void area. And your job as a marketer is to make sure that your cost of acquiral is less than the cost of the revenue you make from that acquiral. So that's it. Yeah. Once you nail that, you can do what you like. If it's $5 to get someone in, $10 of your revenue from that, great. Take as many adverts as you want to. It doesn't matter. But if it's $11 versus $10, then you become the next Uber. Bluntly, you're just throwing money and burning money very, very quickly.
And I would not really recommend to anyone, especially at the indie level, of going the sort of VC type thinking of, well, we're not going to make any profit for the first 10 years, but then we're really going to make the money. It's like that's hard to do, especially for like a small or lone developer. It's just not feasible. You ideally want to be making money from day one, and it is hard in this environment. Like the current, the pricing on apps is, it's a sort of standard topic of conversation at developer conferences when people are in the pub, discussing their revenue models and like, oh, we were thinking of moving to subscription for this stuff, or we were thinking of doing this, or we were going to free with in-app purchase rather than paid up front, and what's working for you, and what works for one person is not going to work for somebody else. PCalc has always been paid up front, and it's always done well. Well, it's not always done well, but it's not. That's a simple way of doing it. It's like, give me the money, here's the thing. And that's the simplest kind of transaction.
So you aren't tempted somehow by subscriptions? I know it sounds odd subscribing to a calculator app, but that's a really big thing right now, isn't it?
But the thing, okay, so there's a number of things to it. As a developer, I would love subscription revenue. It'd be amazing. Regular income, people keep using the app, you keep getting money. Sounds great. As a customer, I hate them. I'm prepared to subscribe to, a couple of apps, but then once it's like every app, then at what point do I say, no, I'm just going to use the built-in calculator. I'm just going to use built-in notes. I'm going to use some other tool, or I'm going to use a lesser free tool, or a tool that has a paid level, but I can get on the free level or something like that. And I know I have this visceral reaction to subscriptions, and I don't like them. So how do I square that with my, as a developer that wants to be sustainable and wants to make money and wants to be able to continue to have their business grow, or at least stay at a level where I have income. But I hate the things. Do I want to inflict them on my customers? Do I have to inflict them on my customers? Because otherwise I'm going to be homeless. It's a really difficult thing. And it would be nice if people just paid for software and bought the things that they liked. That doesn't seem to be working quite as well. And Apple's not helping either, with developers whine for years about wanting paid upfront subscription.
Which just appeared from iKaleb, by the way, about paying for updates.
Yeah, paying updates would be a really nice thing, but Apple had 11 years, 12 years of the App Store now. It's not coming. There's other things that are even more scary on the horizon. Like we've got Apple Arcade, and Apple Arcade is interesting. From a consumer perspective, you pay, $5 a month, and you get all these games from lots of developers. You don't need to get any other games. If they did something similar for apps, where does that leave us? If like for another $5 you get, the best of the App Store. And if you're not in that group, well, that's your income gone, because everybody going to go for this thing. But if you are in that group, what does your income look like then? I don't know that we know what the contracts are like for Apple Arcade. I think I've heard from some people that it's actually pretty good, or that Apple's acting as a publisher, paying for development or something like that. But for an app where it's more of a long, you're in it for the long haul, I'm not sure how well it would work, but that's the kind of thing that sort of keeps me up at night. It's like, how is this going to work? And right now our app development income is down like everybody else's income. And we've actually hit the last few years have been pretty good. And I don't know if that's because I was saying how income was going down, but it's like for developers where it's marginal as to whether they're making a profit or not, a 50% loss of income could, be the difference between whether it's a sustainable business or not. Very easily.
Yes.
Even 10% can make that difference. So
I think the gap is that with Apple Arcade, how many platform games could you have? The answer is quite a few. How many racing games?
Yeah.
Quite a few. How many shoot 'em up games? Quite a few. You wouldn't mind buying 10 or 20 of them. How many FPSs are there? A lot. No one's going to say, yeah, I'm really glad I have 4 calculator apps on my phone. You'd have one app, and you'd stick with that one app, or the one weather app, or the one camera app you use. And I have Halide, I have PCalc, I have Dark Sky, I have the apps I use. I'm not going to jump around too much between them.
Yeah, I mean, but you could then see in that situation, maybe then it comes down to you have to be the one that's in that situation. It's like, well, I would hope it would be me. But
who else would it be?
Well, no, but that's the thing. I sound like the BBC. Other calculators are available, and people do. There are other things that work better for other people. PCalc's not a graphing calculator. It's not a sort of expression-based calculator. And there are people who need something like that, and there are better products out there for doing that. I'm in a particular niche, but yeah, I don't like. We're already. If there's lots of, for any one product, there's lots of different versions on the App Store for it. And it's hard to get that visibility. And we talked about a number of different ways of getting visibility. But, if it did go to that kind of overall subscription model, you could see it just whole product categories just getting wiped out.
Yes. Well, anyway, James, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to wrap up now because you've stayed with us a good long time as it is. Thank you so much for coming on the show for the very first episode. I hope the listeners and watchers and all those folks asking questions have found it useful and a bit more relaxing, something to listen to during this stressful times. James, where can they find you on the internet?
Best place to find me is on, that's James Thomson, and Thomson without a P. Go to pcalc.com for all the PCalcs, including dice. That's it. TLA.systems is our corporate website, but most of the stuff's on PCalc. Yeah, and if you want to hear me talk on various things, look on theincomparable.com, which is where I kind of do all my pop culture-y D&D podcasts, and I occasionally pop up on Relay FM and on the Rebound podcast. I think one of my main advantages as a guest is I say yes a lot. So,
well, listen, folks, if you've enjoyed this interview, this stream, this podcast, whatever we're calling this thing, vodcast, I don't know. Please hit the like button because that helps YouTube recommend us to other folks who then might discover it and might also like it. And then go and buy PCalc. James needs the money. To buy more of these minifigurines at the very least, please hit the like button. It means a lot of your support. And of
James
course,
doesn't necessarily need the money, but James would like some of the money.
Those minifigures are very expensive, James.
Some of them, yeah.
But also, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll do more of these. I'd love to hear who you'd like to hear in future episodes. If you want to find me on the internet, I am, of course, Paul at hackingwithswift.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm 2straws. I've got a Slack. I've got forums. I'm fairly easy to find. Anyway, once again, James, thank you so much. It's been awesome having you here. It's
been a pleasure. I'm looking at the clock, and I can't believe that we've done 1 hour, 45 minutes or something. It's nearly coming up to 5 o'clock. That's impressive.
It is. Think of all the news we haven't read about coronavirus. It's been great, right?
Yeah, I mean, oh God. Did you hear the people who are in, I think it's Germany, Big Brother? They don't know any of it.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. So it's like that. We're going to come out of this, and who knows what the state of the world is going to be like. No, end on a more positive note. We've had a lovely chat.
It's been awesome having you here, and hopefully another one of these soon. And I expect you'll get some good sales on PCalc out of this, by the way, because folks want to see the about screen. They're curious now.
Yeah, you can get the about screen. Well, no, I'm not going to say.
All the secrets of the about screen.
Yeah, but if you like the stuff that I do, yes, it would be nice if people bought it. Dice is a lovely little thing to play with.
So good
for $2.
So good.
But yeah, no. Thanks for having me on, and it's been a great distraction for a little bit. But it's good to. I mean, like the other thing, like we didn't really touch on, is the whole thing with this video stuff. It's great for keeping up social contacts with people. I mean, you might not get to see people in person, but I've been like spending the week filling up my schedule with like virtual lunches with people. Just kind of like people that I would see in person, or people that I don't see very often. And it's like, well, let's just do a regular, Friday lunchtime. Let's, talk about, TV or talk about anything that isn't.
That's a great idea.
And I recommend everyone do that. We're going to drown the internet with all these video streams, but it's better us than Disney Plus getting all the bandwidth. We should talk to each other, and this is a really good way of doing it. And it makes you like talking to you. I kind of like it. You forget that we're not in the same room, kind of thing.
All right. Thanks again, James, and folks, watchers. Thanks for being here. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.